Why, hello there. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Bible in a Year with me, Leedy. I hope you guys all had a fantastic day yesterday. It's Sunday for me, so I kind of took the day off, but we're back at it. Beautiful Monday. And I realized that the last couple of streams, which are on my other channel for Planet Hope, were very, very long. So I don't want to give the impression that reading 4 pages is going to be a 40-minute ordeal. So I am just going to read today, and then I'm going to offer some commentary at the end. So we're just going to get started. We left off with chapter 8 in Genesis last time, so we're moving on to chapter 9 now. God's promise to Noah. God said to Noah and his sons, I am giving you my blessing. Have a lot of children and grandchildren, so people will live everywhere on this earth. All animals, birds, reptiles, and fish will be afraid of you. I have placed them under your control, and I have given them to you for food. From now on, you may eat them, as well as the green plants that you have always eaten. But life is in the blood, and you must not eat any meat that still has blood in it. I created humans to be like me, and I will punish any animal or person that takes a human life. If an animal kills someone, that animal must die. And if a person takes life of another, that person must be put to death. I want you and your descendants to have many children, so people will live everywhere on earth. Again, God said to Noah and his sons, I am going to make a solemn promise to you and to everyone who will live after you. This includes the birds and the animals that came out of the boat. I promise that every living creature on earth and those living on it will never again be destroyed by a flood. The rainbow that I have put in the sky will be my sign to you and to every living creature on earth. It will remind you that I will keep this promise forever. When I send clouds over the earth and a rainbow appears in the sky, I will remember my promise to you and to all other living creatures. Never again will I let floodwaters destroy all life. When I see the rainbow in the sky, I will always remember the promise that I have made to every living creature. The rainbow will be the sign of that solemn promise. Noah and his family. Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, came out of the boat. Ham later had a son named Canaan. All people on earth are descendants of Noah's 3 sons. Noah formed the land and was the first to plant a vineyard. One day, he got drunk and was lying naked in his tent. Ham entered the tent and saw him naked, then went back outside and told his brothers. Shem and Japheth put a robe over their shoulders and walked backwards into the tent. Without looking at their father, they placed it over his body. When Noah woke up and learned what his youngest son had done, he said, I now put a curse on Canaan. He will be the lowest slave of his brothers. I ask the Lord my God to bless Shem and make Canaan his slave. I pray that the Lord will give Japheth more and more land and let him take over the territory of Shem. May Canaan be his slave. Noah lived 350 years after the flood and died at the age of 950. Chapter 10, the Descendants of Noah. After the flood, Shem, Ham, and Japheth had many descendants. The descendants of Japheth. Japheth's descendants had their own languages, tribes, and land. They were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tyrus. Gomer was the ancestor of Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. Javan was the ancestor of Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim, who settled along the coast. The descendants of Ham. Ham's descendants had their own languages, tribes, and land. They were Ethiopia, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. Cush was the ancestor of Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, and Sabteka. Rama was the ancestor of Sheba and Dedan. Cush was the ancestor of Nimrod, a mighty warrior whose strength came from the Lord. Nimrod is the reason for the saying, you hunt like Nimrod with the strength of the Lord. Nimrod first ruled in Babylon, Erech, and Akkad, all of which were in Babylonia. From there, Nimrod went to Assyria and built the great city of Nineveh. He also built Rehoboth, Ir, and Calah, as well as Resen, which is between Nineveh and Calah. Egypt was the ancestor of Ludim, Ananim, Lehabim, Nephtuhim, Kuthrasim, Kuslahim, and Caphtorim, the ancestor of the Philistines. Canaan's sons were Sidon and Heth. He was also the ancestor of the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Arkites, the Sinites, the Arvadites, the Zemarites, and the Hemathites. Later, the Canaanites spread from the territory of Sidon and went as far as Gaza in the direction of Gerar. They also went as far as Lasha in the direction of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim. The descendants of Shem. Shem's descendants had their own languages, tribes, and land. He was the older brother of Japheth and the ancestor of the tribes of Abram. Shem was the ancestor of Elam, Asher, Arpachshad, Lud, and Aram. Aram was the ancestor of Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. Arpachshad was the father of Shelah and the grandfather of Eber, whose first son was named Peleg, because it was during this time that tribes divided up the earth. Eber's second son was Joktan. Joktan was the ancestor of Almodad, Shelah, Hazarmaveth, Gerar, Hadaram, Uzal, Dikla, Obal, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. Their land reached from Mesha in the direction of Sephar in the hill country in the east. This completes the list of Noah's descendants. After the flood, their descendants became nations and spread all over the world. Chapter 11, the Tower of Babel. At first, everyone spoke the same language, but after some of them moved from the east and settled in Babylonia, they said, "Let's build a city with a tower that reaches to the sky. We'll use hard bricks and tar instead of stone and mortar. We'll become famous, and we won't be scattered all over the world." But when the Lord came down to look at the city and the tower, he said, "These people are working together because they all speak the same language. This is just the beginning. Soon they will be able to do anything they want. Come on, let's go down and confuse them by making them speak different languages. Then they won't be able to understand each other." So the people had to stop building the city because the Lord confused their language and scattered them all over the earth. That's how the city of Babel got its name. The descendants of Shem. 2 years after the flood, when Shem was 100, he had a son named Arpachshad. He had more children and died at the age of 600. This is a list of his descendants. When Arpachshad was 35, he had a son named Shelah. Arpachshad had more children and died at the age of 438. When Shelah was 30, he had a son named Eber. Shelah had more children and died at the age of 433. When Eber was 34, he had a son named Peleg. Eber had more children and died at the age of 464. When Peleg was 30, he had a son named Reu. Peleg had more children and died at the age of 239. When Reu was 32, he had a son named Serug. Reu had more children and died at the age of 239. When Serug was 30, he had a son named Nahor. Serug had more children and died at the age of 230. When Nahor was 29, he had a son named Terah. Terah had more children and died at the age of 148. The descendants of Tyr. After Tyr was 70 years old, he had 3 sons, Abram, Nahor, and Haran, who became the father of Lot. Terah's sons were born in the city of Ur in Chaldea, and Hanan died there before the death of his father. The following is the story of Terah's descendants. Abram married Sarai, but she was not able to have any children, and Nahor married Milcah, who was the daughter of Haran and the sister of Iscah. Terah decided to move from Ur to the land of Canaan. He took along Abram and Sarai and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran. But when they came to the city of Haran, they decided to settle there instead. Terah lived to be 205 years old and died in Haran. Chapter 12. The Lord chooses Abram. The Lord said to Abram, "Leave your country, your family, and your relatives, and go to the land that I will show you. I will bless you and make your descendants into a great nation. You will become famous and be a blessing to others. I will bless anyone who blesses you, but I will put a curse on anyone who curses you. Everyone on earth will be blessed because of you." Abram was 75 years old, and when the Lord told him to leave the city of Haran, he obeyed and left with his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all the possessions and slaves they had gotten while in Haran. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram went as far as the sacred tree of Moreh in a place called Shechem. The Canaanites were still living in the land at that time, but the Lord appeared to Abram and promised, "I will give this land to your family forever." Abram then built an altar for the Lord. Abram traveled to the hill country east of Bethel and camped between Bethel and Ai, where he built another altar and worshiped the Lord. Later, Abram started out toward the southern desert. Abram and Egypt. The crops failed and there was no food anywhere in the land. So Abram and his wife Sarai went to live in Egypt for a while. But just before they got there, he said, Sarah, you are really beautiful. When the Egyptians see how lovely you are, they will murder me because I'm your husband. But they won't kill me. They won't kill you. Please save my life by saying that you are my sister." As soon as Abram and Sarai arrived in Egypt, the Egyptians noticed how beautiful she was. The king's officials told him about her, and she was taken to his house. The king was good to Abram because of Sarai, and Abram was given sheep, cattle, donkeys, slaves, and camels. Because of Sarai, the Lord struck the king and everyone in his palace with terrible diseases. Finally, the king sent for Abram and said to him, "What have you done to me? Why didn't you tell me that Sarai was your wife? Why did you make me believe she was your sister? Now I've married her. Take her and go. She's your wife." So the king told his men to let Abram and Sarai take their possessions and leave. Okay, chapter 13, final chapter. Abram and Lot separate. Abram and Sarai took everything they owned and went to the southern desert. Lot went with them. Abram was very rich. He owned many cattle, sheep, and goats, and had a lot of silver and gold. Abram moved from place to place in the southern desert, and finally he went north and set up his tents between Bethel and Ai, where he had earlier camped and built an altar. There he worshipped the Lord. Lot, who was traveling with him, also had sheep, goats, and cattle, as well as his own family and slaves. At this time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were living in the same area, and so there wasn't enough pasture land left for Abram and Lot with all their animals. Besides this, the men who took care of Abram's animals and the ones who took care of Lot's animals started quarreling. Abram said to Lot, "We are close relatives. We shouldn't argue, and our men shouldn't be fighting one another. There is plenty of land for you to choose from. Let's separate. If you go north, I'll go south. If you go south, I'll go north." This happened before the Lord had destroyed the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And when Lot looked around, he saw there was plenty of water in the Jordan Valley. All the way to Zoar, the valley was as green as the garden of the Lord or the land of Egypt. So Lot chose the whole Jordan Valley for himself. And as he started toward the east, he and Abraham separated. Abram stayed in the land of Canaan, but Lot settled near the cities of the valley and put up his tents not far from Sodom, where the people were evil and sinned terribly against the Lord. Abram moves to Hebron. After Abram and Lot had gone their separate ways, the Lord said to Abram, "Look around to the north, south, east, and west. I will give you and your family all the land you can see. It will be theirs forever. I will give you more descendants than there are specks of dust on the earth, and someday it will be easier to count the specks of dust than to count your descendants. Now, walk back and forth across the land, because I am giving it to you." Abram took down his tent and went to live near the sacred trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he built an altar in honor of the Lord. And 13 minutes on the dot. There we go. So, yeah, and I hope you can maybe see that it doesn't necessarily have to take a long time to read, just a couple chapters. I think we read from chapter 9 to 14 today. So that only took less than 15 minutes. It doesn't really have to be a long thing. And if you keep up at this rate, then yeah, we'll be able to read through it in a year with still having a day off every week. So we can talk a little bit about what we just read. It was a lot. So we jumped quite a lot, quite a few generations. Started off with Noah and how he kind of coped after the flood and, what happened in the new land. And then we ended with the story of Abram and his nephew Lot, which for some of you who've read the Bible before know that this is just before God destroys the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is a pretty famous story that a lot of people are familiar with. So if we go back to the story of Noah, we kind of started off with God promising to Noah and his family that he's never going to destroy the world again with a flood, and that he is putting the rainbow in the sky as a symbol of this promise, so that he will always remember this promise. And again, we talked about this before, God is all-knowing. It's not like he's going to forget his promise. It's more of just a way of symbolizing the fact that whenever you see a rainbow, you just know God. It's a beautiful thing that God is doing for the people, and he looks at it and he'll just remember in a way without without forgetting. It's something that other people have explained before, but for us on Earth, it's just an interesting way of recalling the story. And if you have kids or anyone like that, it's a fun thing to be able to see a rainbow and explain to kids where the rainbow came from. And so after that, we kind of get a little family drama where Noah discovers alcohol and he gets a little bit tipsy and passes out, and his younger son, Ham, when Ham saw his father, he went and tried to cause a little bit of drama with the rest of the family by being kind of disrespectful to his father and telling everybody what his father had done. And this is something that I find kind of an interesting story, because it's basically Noah was the one who got drunk. Ham is the one who was disrespectful and wanted to gossip. But then his older brothers, they were the ones who acted with honor and tried to cover their father's shame, which again, that symbolism goes back to the Garden of Eden of God covering the shame of Adam and Eve. And Noah is very angry, even though, to be honest, he was kind of the instigator of all this. Maybe he didn't know what alcohol will do to you, but he says that he's putting a curse on Canaan. And part of this curse is that Japheth will take over the territory of Shem, which I don't know what that's about, because Japheth didn't do anything. But yeah, some of these things are things that I don't understand, which we'll find quite a bit, I think. So that's the nice thing. There's always something new to understand and discover in the Bible. And then, of course, we went through all the descendants, which I'm sorry for anybody who's actually studied the Bible in more depth. I don't know how to pronounce a lot of these names. I did my best. And I remember when I was little, reading lists of names was always really hard. I just didn't want to do it, but reading it out loud, it's actually kind of cool. These names kind of roll off the tongue a little bit, and some of them have been the inspiration for names in stories that I've written. So that's been pretty awesome. And then we get another little story, which within these 4 pages, a lot of the Bible stories are pretty short. So we got the Tower Babel, which is where the origin of language came from. And again, you get another little scene with God talking to himself. So he came down to look at the city and the tower, which again, he didn't need to come and see. He already knew what was going to happen, and he knew what they were doing. But he saw what they were doing, and these people are basically trying to be famous. And this is a way of kind of worshiping yourself and trying to get glory for yourself instead of to God, which is important because if somebody has done something for you and you want to try to take the credit for yourself, it makes sense that the person who's done something for you would be very miffed. It's not honest. So God is understandably upset, and so he goes down and he breaks up this little mission that they have. So again, it's another example of God doesn't let evil happen. He does intervene. He does it in his own time, which a lot of time doesn't make sense to us, but he doesn't just sit back and let us do whatever we want. And obviously he intervened here because it was very important that this tower doesn't get built and that people don't, again, start worshiping themselves, probably in a lot of the ways that happened before the flood, where all they care about is themselves and fame. And that is probably what led to the horrific widespread violence that, led to pretty much only a handful of people on Earth not being 100% evil and corrupt. Another interesting thing that when we go back to the story of Noah happened is God gave permission for Noah and his family to start eating animals. So that, I guess, breaks the whole vegan thing that I was so happy about before, because I'm a vegan. But, it's what happened. God has allowed people to eat animals if they choose. And he also lays down some rules for what happens if people are killed. So again, just curbing that widespread corruption. Before, when the first murder happened, with Cain and Abel, God sent Cain away and put a mark on him to warn people not to harm him. And we saw that it was very hard for Cain to handle that, and he was very upset. That was a really fit punishment that hopefully taught Cain a lesson. But we see later with the story of, I think it was Lamech, who kind of used that as an example of how to gain superpowers from God, was to kill someone and get God to put a curse on people who hurt you. So now the punishment for killing somebody is that you will lose your life. You're not going to get anything out of it, especially if you don't see being sent away from God as any sort of punishment. Okay, so we'll just take a couple. Oh yeah, Abram and Egypt. That is another quick little story that happens. And you'll see later that this isn't the first time that happens, but Abram and Sarai go to Egypt, and Abram tells this lie that Sarai is his sister, and this causes the king to believe that Sarai is, single and free for him to have her. And so he takes her, marries her, which I'm assuming in this context probably may mean that he slept with her. So he gets all these curses put on him because of this lie that Abram told. So Abram, tells the truth eventually, and the king is really mad at him and does the right thing and sends them away. But of course, this is a very hurtful thing that Abram did, but he was afraid for his own life. Again, this corruption and everything like that is starting to become rampant again, as we'll see later with the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. So I think this is another story that's maybe not as famous as the Tower Babel story, but it is something that a lot of people are familiar with. And it does kind of shed light on how God intervenes. He doesn't just let bad things, or he doesn't just let corruption happen. He intervenes when it's the most important, when it's going to have the most good for everyone. And then we go into Abram and his nephew Lot, which this story is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, is probably up there. If we're going to be ranking the famousness of Bible stories, I think this one would probably get an A+. I think almost everybody knows about the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Here we're getting the setup for that. So Lot goes to stay closer to the city of Sodom. Abram goes a little bit further away. What I think is kind of funny is the fact that when Abram offers to separate from Lot, and if you can choose whatever area you want, I'm going to go the opposite way, so you get first dibs. And so Lot sees this amazing place, the Jordan Valley, and he decides to take absolutely all of it. So it's like, if somebody you care about is offering you, you can have the first few slices of pizza. You take the one that has the most, let's say, olives on it, and your friend is left with like nothing. But God kind of turns that around, and he says, Abram, your descendants are actually going to have this whole area, from everywhere you can see from east to west. And this is going to include the Jordan Valley. So I have to wonder if this was maybe kind of, in a way, a little bit of a reward or a pat on the back for Abram for doing the honorable thing, looking out for his nephew, putting his nephew first. And we can see this in a lot of different teachings that people give, is that when you put others first, when you do the honorable thing, God will bless you multiple times what you had to give up. Maybe not in the way that you expect, and maybe not in the timing that you would expect, because we can see here, God says it's going to be your descendants. It's not going to be you. But God takes what you give and he gives it back to you in multitudes of ways. Okay, and so that's kind of where we left off. So tomorrow we'll hopefully get to the story of Abram. We're continuing on with Abram and Lot. They go on a couple of different adventures. This was kind of the first one. Okay, so the first couple of videos in the series are on my Planet Hope channel. I had some technical difficulties, so that's why I couldn't put it on my personal channel here, but definitely go and check it out. I really hope to be able to continue this, just telling people what the Bible really says. There's a lot of misconceptions about what is and isn't in the Bible, so we're just going to go through it and find out for ourselves. If you read the Bible, let me know maybe what your favorite story is, and what you thought of the stories that we just read. And I pray that you guys have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time.